let's first start with that Francois Hollande, and in France, and that change, it seems to be taking center stage when it comes to what's happening in the eurozone. I want to ask you two things. First of all, what the concerns are for EU leaders with this new leadership, and second of all, if the markets are concerned and what they're concerned about.
Well, I think they're both one and the same thing, because clearly Monsieur Hollande's policies are supposed to be pro-growth, and he has said explicitly that he will be seeking a renegotiation of the fiscal compact, which was agreed by EU leaders last December. And basically, the Germans are saying, no, we're not going to do that, but we are prepared to compromise perhaps on growth. And I think over the course of the next few months, we will get some kind of EU growth package. It possibly will be presented to a summit, in June. But again, the markets are concerned about this, because basically what they see is a backtracking on the fiscal consolidation. Now, it's arguable whether the markets have fully bought into the fiscal consolidation plans in the first place, but certainly any sense that, that there is backtracking and that the situation will be allowed to drift as it has done for, for much of the last decade, certainly is going to give the markets quite some jitters going forward.
Peter, Angela Merkel is going to be meeting with Hollande going forward, and I would like to ask you what you think that discussion is going to be about, because Angela Merkel has come out and said that what has been done so far in terms of the treaty deal, that is not negotiable. Do you think that they would have to perhaps go back and look at those terms and probably, like you say, come up with a compromise?
Well, the EU, if it stands for anything, it stands for compromise. And over the course of the last 20 years, or 30 years even, we've had many instances when the French and Germans might disagree on policy pronouncements, but ultimately they forge a consensus. And if you think back to the Stability Pact, for example, which was put forward in the mid-1990s, basically all that they did was change the name to the Stability and Growth Pact and allow the thing to go forward, and that kind of satisfied the French objections to what was seen as a German-based fiscal rule. I wouldn't be at all surprised if you do something similar this time around. They call it the Fiscal and Growth Compact. At the very least, it will get around some of the objections, even if the substantive details remain unchanged. But going forward, there will have to be some form of growth packages to allay French concerns about ongoing austerity. That's what the French voted for, and I think that if they feel their views are being ignored by EU leaders, that could certainly give rise to further political tension at a time when the tension levels are already pretty high. But
then I want to ask you this. Going back to French public spending, that's around 55% of GDP, and a lot of reporting saying that France has not balanced its budget since 1974. So where is, with the growth projections that Hollande gave during his campaign and the promises that he's made to increase public sector jobs, for instance, where is all that going to come from, considering where France is and where the eurozone as a whole is?
Well, it's only going to come from one place, and that's further borrowing from the markets. By the way, these are the same markets which Monsieur Hollande has spent much of the last few months denigrating. So it's going to make for an interesting set of relationships, I think, between markets and governments. No, you're dead right, because the question you pose is the fundamental one which worries everybody. How can the French government afford it? And the simple fact is they can't. There's absolutely no two ways about it. They can't afford it unless they're prepared to allow their deficit to rise further. And of course, if they try to do that, they will be punished by the markets. And I think what that will ultimately end up being, leading to, is a case of the French government being forced to do a U-turn. And they will not be able to deliver on the promises that Monsieur Hollande made during the election campaign. It's as simple as that.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about what's been coming out of the EU Commission. We've got President Jose Barroso talking about a possible turnaround for the eurozone, and he says it's possible for the eurozone to turn around as early as end this year. How realistic are those expectations?
Well, if he's talking about the growth numbers, yes, it's possible we'll see an end to negative growth in the middle of the year even, and some small positive growth numbers towards the end of the year and heading into 2013. But the fact of the matter is that any turnaround is going to be sluggish, particularly if the austerity programs are maintained in a number of eurozone countries. It's not going to be a significant enough turnaround to generate the kind of job growth which is going to placate electorates around Europe. And I rather suspect that over the course of anywhere between the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be ongoing grinding growth, hopefully positive, but certainly not particularly rapid. And I think that's going to be something which further adds to the degree of resentment, I think, which a lot of European voters feel that the eurozone project is not delivering. It's part of the bargain in delivering higher living standards.
I want to ask about the Commission pitching for a big increase in the EU budget, and this is what they're planning to do. Could it happen? And why I ask you this is because right now we have been talking about independent states, like France, for instance, that we have discussed so far, not having the capacity to probably be able to have the growth they want to. But then the Commission saying Europe as a whole, if they were to come together and, for instance, be able to spend in infrastructure that could turn the countries around, how possible is it that the EU could agree to increasing the EU budget as a whole?
I just don't think many European countries are going to be in a position to do that. The European budget, the EU budget, over the course of the last number of decades has been a source of major concern, and ultimately what's happened, I think, is that the German government has dipped into its pockets and bailed out the EU project. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. Certainly France is going to be in no position to raise its contributions to any EU budget. And in terms of financing infrastructural investment projects, I think we only have to look at places like Spain, which has put a massive amount of investment into infrastructure over the course of the past 20 years, and look at where it's got us. So infrastructure investment is not actually the answer. And I certainly think that if that's the way the EU is going, then I think most governments are going to give them fairly short shrift.
Peter, how do you think the Germans are feeling right now? Because as you say, Germany has put a lot of its money in terms of bailing out some of these countries that have been in trouble. And then you've got a country like France where you don't know which way they're going to be going now because there has been a change of leadership. What does this mean for a country like Germany? And like I say, what should be the sentiment be in that country?
Well, there's clearly a lot of popular resentment, I think, that taxpayer euros, German taxpayer euros, are going to be, are flung down to the southern European countries in a bid to bail them out. Now, that isn't the reality, of course, because what's actually happened is that many of these southern European countries have received big loans. They haven't been given any taxpayer euros at all, but nonetheless that perception persists that in actual fact Germany is bailing out everybody else. And obviously that has given rise to a significant shift in the political spectrum. We're seeing a number of fringe parties beginning to make significant gains. And I think the German government, Chancellor Merkel, faces a significant balancing act, a difficult balancing act over the course of the next 18 months or thereabouts until the next general election, because she has to placate her voters and basically give them the idea that Germany is playing hardball with the rest of the eurozone, while secretly making it clear to those people in Germany who matter that the eurozone project is very much in Germany's interest, and it doesn't make sense for Germany to pull the plug. So it's going to be very difficult for her to balance these two opposing forces.
Peter, I want to talk about Africa, because we've seen the knock-on effect that the eurozone crisis has been having on the African continent, and we are still seeing some economies in Africa showing significant growth numbers, and how that has been attractive to investors. Going forward, do you think that this trend could continue, or do you think there'll be so much focus on the eurozone that people might be a little bit risk-averse to invest in Africa?
Well, it's a very good question, because one of the questions which is posed to me on a regular basis is, what are the prospects for investing anywhere else other than Europe? And obviously the question of Africa tends to come up, and I think it's benefited a lot over the course of the last few months and possibly even years, because it's coming from a low base, therefore the growth potential is very high. There's a lot of liquidity out there which is looking for a home. Investors are risk averse, it's true, but they're not throwing a huge proportion of their liquidity at the African investment situation, and as a consequence I think that they will continue to invest in places where they think there are going to be decent returns, and Africa, I think, still has legs, if you like. That particular investment scenario still has some way to run. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to continue investing in the long run, but certainly given the lack of alternatives elsewhere, and given particularly the commodity wealth in some parts of Africa, a lot of funds I think are going to make their way there.